Hello, everybody. Just about to start in a few moments. Just going to give a few minutes for other people to sign on if needs be as well. So the purpose of this meeting is going to be just to kind of give people a bit more of an idea about what's going on with the local plan. I know many of you will probably already have a decent idea about what's going on, but I think it's just really a good idea to have a bit of a refresher on this. I'm trying to multitask at the same time as well, so I'm not doing incredibly well on multitasking at the moment. I just thought it's important that you knew from the outset that the session will be recorded and posted online. So if you don't want to be viewed, keep your cameras off. Please mute your microphone and place your questions in the chat box. There will be an opportunity for asking questions at the end of the presentations, because we've got a few different speakers on there. I'm just waiting for permission to share my screen, and then what I'll do is I'll start with the slides and give a quick introduction of the different speakers that we've got, giving a little bit of information on this. And also explaining who I am as well. So if you give me one moment, I'm just sharing the same screen as before. So today we'll have Jean Walters from CPRE, which is, I'm trying to remember the word, for the C now, for the protection of rural England. And Crean from Friends of the Earth, Stuart Woodhall from South Solihull Community Group, and I'm Councillor Max McLoughlin from the Green Party. I'll hand over to Jean Walters because I think it's important that we get a diversity of views on what's within the local plan. I'll stop sharing and I'll hand the reins over to Jean just to share a few words on what she thinks of the local plan so far.
Hello, Max. Hello, everybody. Good evening. It is Campaign to Protect Rural England.
So thank you. I knew you'd get that.
So on the broader aspect, first of all, to consider the local plan unsound, you have to look at have they carried out due diligence on analysing the sustainability of the individual sites. My opinion is that the plan is unsound. Also that they haven't covered the main directives and objectives of the plan, which says to distribute development throughout the borough, where Blythe, together with Borsal Common, have got around 1,650 dwellings each. Blythe has the most. In earlier respondents, we did make to the council and said that this was unfair and pointed out why, but all these comments have just been ignored, and they've carried on with a huge amount of development for the Blythe area. Blythe, as you know, has seen significant developments over the last 5 to 8 years, and the rural roads and infrastructure haven't kept up with it all. And the proposals for some minor road improvements, some traffic lights by the Miller and Carter roundabout, and the odd tinkering around, it still isn't addressing the character of the rural roads in the Blythe area. So there's a lot of holes in all of these reports, which I'm still ploughing through. It's quite a mammoth task for all of you, I know. But basically, I think we have to look at reducing the housing numbers overall for Blythe. But I think I better start by saying I'm also going to be addressing the reduction of housing numbers for Solihull, because I really do not think we should have the extra 2,000, well, not all of the 2,000 houses from the greater Birmingham housing market area. I think Andy Street has done a wonderful job in developing areas in the centre of Birmingham and in some of the Black Country areas, where there were sort of derelict sites, and about building brownfield first before you go into green belt. And I don't think that's been addressed. Also, I'm going to be evoking paragraph 11B of the National Planning Policy Framework. I'll be doing that because if you can prove that by developing this extra land of some of these sites, as you know, are of high grade greenbelt status, 7 and 8 around Dickens Heath. You've also got areas of high ecological value, areas that flood, and all these constraints are so bad that it is justification for saying that you can't involve all of the land involved. So you shouldn't have to provide all these extra houses. And I've pointed this out to Solihull's planners and in courts a few times. They haven't done anything about this. And I really think we need to address this. It's something I'll be raising with Andy Street and ward councillors and Sakid Bhatti, our MP. That is fundamental. If we can reduce that 2,000 figures, which may not be necessary now in view of I say the work that Andy Street has done, they need to look again at the housing figures for Birmingham if they have been reduced because of the work that has been done on building on derelict land. So that's the broader element. Obviously, I'm very, very pleased that Site 13 was taken out, and that was a lot of work done by Max and myself. But obviously, we've still got Site 26, which could be argued is a sustainable urban extension. There are a lot of problems there, which I think, Max, you'll go into in more detail because you have more knowledge of that site than I do. I'm still plowing through the information. I'd like to talk about Site 4, which is BL1 now. While they keep changing the technicality numbers of them, I don't know, just to confuse us all, I think. So the main reason for the choice of this site for new housing was its location close to Whitlock's End station, and that is the only justification for allocating that site. But we've shown that with the local knowledge we all have, that the site simply is not sustainable and should not have been considered as a green site. In fact, should have been a red site on the very first round of appraisals in the sustainability appraisal. But the combined significant adverse effects from developing the land of Dickens Heath makes the proposal wholly inappropriate in terms of sound planning practice and does not accord with either national or local planning policies. If you know, Dickens Heath was granted planning permission in 1994 as a new village, and that has increased incredibly from the 850 dwellings it was given planning permission for to 1,757 today. And the proposed new housing, which in fact I feel is detached from the village because it doesn't have direct access to it. You can't get an access through Birchie Close for legal reasons. And the walking distance is certainly far exceeds the 800-metre walking distance. In fact, it's 1.5 kilometres away.
Jean, would you like me to share a map showing the sites?
If you can, I'm not very good at that.
That's all right, no worries. I've got it ready. I just had to find the right slide.
Please. I appreciate it. That's great. Thank you very much. Excellent. So you can see, which was formerly Site 4, that is now for 250 houses. With the total site, actually, that is not quite that now because the northern part is now a local wildlife site and they've taken that off. They also reduced it from the 700 houses because of, I did point out to them about the ancient hedgerows that inhabit this site. So that's going to put the figures now up to 2,250 odd, which is a huge consideration. So you've got narrow rural roads, you've got problems in the village for parking, as we all know, even though the parking study that has been done is not worth the paper it's written on. I don't know where they get that from. It must have been a Monday afternoon when they did that analysis. Nobody knows in the area you can't park in Dickens Heath. And with all the other proposals around here, it's going to be even worse. It was a high scoring site of 7 and 8, which means particularly for coalescence, it is a prime part of that. One of my main fears, though, especially with the Environment Bill, which hopefully will become an act fairly soon, it has been delayed, as you may well be aware. It's surrounded by 4 local wildlife sites, and in fact is in within a kilometre away, there's even probably 6 local wildlife sites. That's more than any other allocated site. Where in the sustainability appraisal, it says, oh, is it near a local wildlife site? It doesn't say how it's affected and the interconnectivity between these local wildlife sites, which hasn't been fully evaluated at all. I mean, we should, of course, first do no harm. And this site certainly will do a huge amount of harm. And how they say, oh, we'll mitigate and provide the extra 10%. Well, even the extra 10% isn't sufficient because most local authorities are addressing the Environment Bill and are making all new developments have 20% over and above what is being planned for. So, you know, that's a fairly low environmental target for Solihull Council, which you may all want to comment on. The land is liable to flooding. I have sent several photographs, and other people have over the years. There's flooding to the road at the junction of Dickens Heath Road and Bertuliso's. There's also flooding along Tithe Barn Lane. Those 2 areas, how are you going to get over the regular flooding if you're going to put even more houses in the area? But they're saying it's only flood zone 1 mainly, and a little bit of zone 2 and 3 to the west. Well, that isn't correct, because I do have some sympathy for the Solihull Council's staff, because the budgets that the planners and you know, the various officers involved in this plan have been trying to do is very, very difficult indeed for them. So a lot of this work has been done by external consultants that don't have the local knowledge that we would have or the planning department would have. And the drainage situation is that people were asked to write in if their property was flooded, which a lot of people did, but they didn't include in their survey and study land that was flooded. And the sports fields flood very regularly and quite severely in 2012 and 2018. So it's a lot more than the 100-year flood, and it's obviously going to get worse with climate change. So that's another factor, that it should be in flood zone 2, but accurate, detailed information has not been achieved. So a lot of the site selection for site BL1 is based on inaccurate information. So it isn't sustainable in terms of access to the local facilities. It doesn't necessitate getting into a car, as you know, the bus routes are very poor, but even if you put extra buses on, people don't use them. The Blythe villages are very high in car ownership rate. And as you see on the buses, if you look at them, hardly anybody ever uses them. They go in some peculiar routes that it would take you so that you could walk quicker where you wanted to get to. The other factor that wasn't put in was the distance away from employment. Now, you're further than 15 minutes from an employment centre, and again necessitates the need to travel by car. So all of these factors were not put into a very good report. I think it was an afterthought. Oh, well, it's near the railway station, so it's sustainable. Make it work. But it doesn't. There are other sites I've looked at. If we do have to provide all these extra houses, if we can't get it reduced, I have looked at other sites that I think not ideal. I don't really want them, but if we had to have them, would be better than Dickens Heath. And I'm looking at Tidbury Green Golf Course, which isn't, it's about the same in sustainability, but it wouldn't affect the character and identity of Dickens Heath, which is another major factor. Solihull Council said they were very, very pleased about the award-winning Dickens Heath Village designed by John Simpson. But in fact, they will ruin it by allocating this huge site. It makes no sense. It's detached from the settlement in many ways. So physically, and there are also very strong landscape barriers to the site. So it will be a separate identity of its own. So you might, if it's a separate identity, you might as well go to Tidbury Green Golf Course, which doesn't have so many restraints on it. You haven't got local wildlife sites around it. You haven't got ancient woodland. It drains, it doesn't flood because it's on a slope. And my idea is to create a green cycleway, footway, where the River Cole runs, and join that up with the Miller site at Tidbury Green. And that could be something that'd be really good for the general area, that we could have proper walking, cycling areas all the way to the station from Tidbury Green. I've had a word with Tidbury Green Parish Council, and they're in favour of this as well, and are opposing Site 4, BL1, sorry. So if we had to have other development, that is a better site, but it has been discounted because they haven't done a proper sustainability appraisal. There's been many other sites I'm looking at over Windmill Lane, site BL3, that's going to seriously adversely affect the setting of the windmill. We're trying to create a country park there, but that looks as if it'll go out of the window if that site goes ahead.
Gee,
So
I'm conscious that some of this might become a little bit clearer as well after I've shown some of the relevant slides to that. I do want to give an opportunity whether Chris Crean wants to just say a few words just on some of the general principles on sustainability.
Okay.
Just so that a quick 5 minutes, and then because I've got a few slides just to give people more of a visual idea as well. So Chris, are you all right to give just a couple of minutes, just idea of what are the most sustainable approaches to these kinds of plans?
Yeah, okay, thanks Max, and thanks a lot for allowing me in, folks. I feel a little bit of an interloper really, because I actually live in Birmingham, but I have to say I saw the road I used to live on when I was a kid in that map. I grew up in Shirley. I went to Our Lady of the Wayside School, and I remember Solihull Borough being formed in 1974. And I would say that all Solihull has done to large extents and purposes since 1974 is actually grow houses. And by growing houses, it has generated revenue through council tax and also general business activity for its coffers. And while I'm not sure whether West Midlands Friends of the Earth, who I work for, will actually appear at this inquiry, we're more than happy to help in any way that we can in the way in which you formulate your arguments. And I think that I'd like to concentrate on two things really. One is what's going on at the national level. And then secondly, to a certain extent, what we've lost at the regional level. And I think that is why you're facing what you're facing at the moment. I think at the national level, we can't ignore the fact that since 2010, between Eric Pickles and now Robert Jenrick, we have had the most appalling attack on the democracy that exists within our planning system since probably it was invented post Second World War. And what that is doing is placing people like yourselves right at the front line of fighting to defend your local heritage, your local biodiversity, and also trying to overcome the supposed theory of the duty to cooperate between local authorities, which has not worked one iota to actually enable development to be taken away from the honeypots. And I would say that if we look at regional planning across the West Midlands, one of the things that we have been doing over the last 30 or 40 years would have been to take away the pressure on the south and east of the West Midlands region, and primarily the Merredon Gap and the M40, M42 corridor, and direct it towards the Black Country, towards Stoke and towards Telford. And that primarily is to make the interventions into the economic model that takes the jobs to those places. And by doing that, we will be able to maximise the use of existing infrastructure. And that infrastructure would not just be brownfield land. And I think we have got to identify that there are issues about brownfield land, not only in terms of its contamination issues, but also if you talk to the Wildlife Trust, sometimes brownfield land is very, very important for urban wildlife. So we have to, again, in urban areas, think about the balance between development and also biodiversity and the natural environment. But also when we're looking at maximising the use of existing infrastructure, we're not just talking about the brownfield sites, we're talking about the electricity cables, we're talking about the gas networks, we're talking about the sewage networks, we're talking about the water in to properties, rather than constantly bolting on new development onto existing infrastructure and actually putting that under greater strain. But also within those places, you've got the social infrastructure, and that will be the schools, it will be the hospitals, it will be the surgeries, it will be the pharmacies, it will be all the sort of stuff that makes a place worth living in. And we will also be working with the local vernacular not to create car-dependent communities. And I think Jean was just touching on that in the moment earlier on. And that is that within a lot of what Solihull has done over the last 30 years is actually create more and more car-dependent communities. And I'll finish on this in a way, but it's bringing us back. I was going to try and, I don't know if any of you ever read the book by John Time, Motorways versus Democracy, in which he touches on the inquiries into the M42. And I was going to go back onto that and start waxing lyrical, but I don't think we've got the time for that. But I'm more than happy to entertain you into some of the activities that John Time got up to in the 1970s, trying to defend us against the role of tarmac. But one of the things I think we have to factor into where we are at the moment with this particular local plan is, does it address the climate emergency? Does it address the biodiversity emergency? But I would say also, this plan is already out of date, and it's already out of date even before it's published because of what we're going through at the moment in this pandemic. And only this morning or yesterday or whatever, I don't understand what Arcadia is. I don't really know much about Philip Green, his business shenanigans, but yet again, we are seeing another huge potential threat to the high street as we knew it. And I'm sure that one of the things that we could be doing now is actually starting to reevaluate the huge amount of land that is under tarmac and what I would call crinkly sheds for shopping that could actually be used not for shopping but for residential development. And I'm sure there's loads of that all over the borough of Solihull. The one I would just highlight, which is close to where I used to go to school, and that will be right at the top of Marshall Lake Road, which used to be the old Lucas Alternative Factory, which is now a cornucopia of shopping, which probably in the next era of shopping should not exist. If we want Solihull Town Centre and Shirley Town Centre to be viable, we should not have more car-dependent shopping going on, and that would create a huge amount of land that might actually eat into the demand that Jean was talking about for greenbelt developments in the borough. I'll stop there, but I will I will stay along this afternoon and probably learn a lot from what you're going to talk about in terms of the way I can think about how, first of all, West Midlands Friends of the Earth might be able to help you, but also your battle is not a battle in isolation from loads and loads of other communities that are being forced to live with developers running roughshod over your natural environment and create car dependent developments. Cheers.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. What I'll do is I'll run through a presentation and I'll give Stuart Woodhall an opportunity as the chair of South Solihull Community Group just to jump in with some comments a little bit later. So basically just wanting to give you a bit of an idea of what's planned, how to find out more information, how to respond, and obviously you're getting an idea of what we think of it. There's 3 different groups who are speaking today, well, 4 different groups. I'm speaking as a local councillor. This is my sort of view of it. But also we will be sharing a chief executive of one of the GP surgery groups as well. By the way, if you can't ever see what's on the right-hand side of the screen, if you're on a computer, you might have some of the visual boxes there. If you move the cursor to the top, you can collapse those boxes. And there'll be an opportunity for some questions at the end, but I will be asking you some questions in a poll as we go through. So the first one's actually just here now. I'm being helped by Steve Cordwell at the same time, so he's probably just scrambling around looking to launch this poll. And I just want to find out how you found out about the current consultation on the local plan, because I'm conscious that in the current situation, not everybody might be fully aware of what's going on with that. So Steve, are you able to launch that poll? It's poll number 1.
Slight problem with that. I can't see the polling buttons. Are you sure you set them up correctly?
I did, but we can come back. We can come back to it later on anyway. So I'll move on whilst you're having a look. So just to let you know kind of what the outlay of the local plan is. It's ultimately providing a justification for 15,000 homes. So here's that sort of justification. You don't need to focus on all the details. Again, this is posted online. You can pause it and look in more detail, or you can go to the council's local plan website. So it's saying at the moment we've got 90,000 homes at 2020. By 2030, we're expecting that to be 97,259. And it gives some of the details on the median house prices, median earnings, and the affordability ratio calculated with the anticipated growth is partly how they project the number of homes that you're going to have to build. So within the government formula, it comes out as 12,912. They add on the 2,000 from the housing market area shortfall. And I think the housing market area shortfall isn't always understood. It often gets called the Birmingham shortfall, but it's lots of different local authorities, and it's a strategic housing market area where they anticipate there's a certain amount of growth. And it's a bit like a bill at the end of a meal. If you throw in your pounds for the starter in the drink that you had because you didn't have a main meal at the beginning, it means that everybody else is sort of roped into that kind of arrangement of paying. So you have a bit of a first mover advantage. Birmingham did go sooner, but Birmingham also had difficulties with some of the brownfield sites. So what's the way in which Solihull's planning to meet this is basically, this is the calculation. I won't dwell on it too much. The bit that we're sort of focusing on is this 5,270, which is the allocated sites. So that's almost all green belt that they're talking about. Some of it's windfall housing land supply. Windfall housing land supply, it doesn't mean that, houses are going to just suddenly fall off trees and appear around the place. It's things that they don't have to think about where the homes are going to go. They're anticipating houses being built. An example of that would be the office supplies site on the Stratford Road, which is being converted into retirement homes, the police station, Morrison's, Powergen, those sites, those facilities, they get classed as windfall development because they're sites which have existing planning permission. You're knocking a building down and you're building something new. Also, the more controversial bit is what often gets called garden grabbing or infilling. So the reason why that's relevant is because you'll probably realise that from the windfall housing land supply, Shirley has been quite negatively impacted by that in recent times. So just to give you a bit of an idea of what's going on with the plan, this is one of the first pages in the plan. Just to give you an idea about how big this plan is, it's obviously the median house prices in Solihull, 277,500, which is why lots of developers want to build here. Plans seeking to build 15,000 dwellings. So that's a 16% increase in 15 years. So the resale value of these homes is going to be over £4 billion. So it's a really significant thing that, you know, we should all really be caring about. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing the screen just to be able to launch the polls. Actually, we may have a problem with the polls. So the poll button's not on here. I think when we've shared hosts, something has gone on with the poll button disappearing. So the process is, we've got a consultation that started on the 30th of October, running to the 14th of December. Now, with that consultation, the supporting evidence is 10,526 pages. I'm not expecting everybody to read all of those. I've made my best endeavour to do that, and even with speed reading, it's very, very difficult. So part of what we're doing is asking for an extension. So it's important to understand how the plan can be influenced. At this stage, there's an opportunity for the Conservative leader of the council and the cabinet portfolio holder after this consultation to make amendments to it before it goes for public inspection. Then when it goes to the inspector for public examination, there's an opportunity for some changes to be made then. In theory, there are changes to be made by the Secretary of State for the Department of Communities, Housing and Local Government, which is Robert Jenrick. I don't want to get too political about it, but I don't hold a great deal of hope in any favourable changes coming at that stage. And if everything is absolutely terrible with this, there is an opportunity for a judicial review if due process isn't followed, if there's some information which has been presented at a consultation, or there's been some failure in the process along the way. Now, one of the reasons why we're asking for a consultation extension is because actually lots of other local authorities who are consulting on local plans at the moment, and I'll be honest, most of their plans are quite small in comparison to Solihull's, have extended their local plans during this period, either because there's new information which has been published. An example in Solihull would be the Solihull Town Centre Master Plan, which I'll come on to again later. But just to show you, this isn't party political. There are Labour and Conservative controlled local authorities that have extended their consultation period. We did put an amendment in to ask for an extension, and we were unsuccessful with that. And one of the arguments that was given was this process has been going on for several years. So I actually compiled when these pages were actually produced. 42% of the 10,526 pages were published in 2020. Another 12% since the last consultation, which was in 2019. And 5% of those pages don't actually have any date associated with them. So we can't tell if they were published recently, if they've been superseded or not. And of those ones in 2020, actually 80% of the ones that were published were on the day that the consultation was launched, which is the 30th of October. So we're having to plough through lots and lots of evidence in a short amount of time, which is quite challenging. I'll skip past those polls, and I think you probably want to know where the houses are going. This is obviously a map of the entire borough, and it's very difficult to pull the information out. But just so if you can see my cursor, that's Balsall Common, Berkswell. So you can see there's a considerable amount of development around there. There's one large site in Knoll, a small site, and then a smaller patch. Around East Solihull, there's Kingshurst Town Centre redevelopment, another small development in the north of the borough. And we don't actually have the sites from Solihull Town Centre formally included in the way they could be. And this is what's going down in Shirley. So that's site 12, which has now become BL2. That's what was site 4, which is now site BL1, and that was site 26, which got included when site 13 was removed. That's now become BL3, and it's very, very confusing. And you don't feel embarrassed if you are confused by those site changes. If you look through the actual documents and the evidence for this, you'll find at least 5 different references for some of these sites. There was the original call for sites reference, there was AECOM, consultation, analysis references. We've then got the previous local plan review references, and then they've changed it again now. So if you're not keeping up to speed with what's going on with those site references, I have sympathy with you, because I think everyone's struggling with it. So I showed this before. Obviously, we removed 600 from the Shirley area, but part of what we argued was to increase the number of dwellings on the TRW site. So we have got 668 dwellings going there, but they've also increased the number on the BL2 site to 1,000. So that's the bit of the BL1 site which has been removed. So that field's still included, and most of this down here. So yeah, basically I'll just move and show you what's kind of going on with the numbers. So site 4, now BL1, originally was 700, now it's 350. Site 11 was already being built, was 400, gone up to 668. Site 12, BL2, was 850, now 1,000. Site 13 removed. Site 26, now BL3. So the actual differences in the proportion is very little. Previously, Shirley sites were taking 41% of the allocated sites, we're now taking 39%. So it's still a disproportionate number being located over here. Just for a bit of context, I mean, the other area which is probably most negatively impacted, and I know that Jean was mentioning about Windmill Lane site, which was originally site 3, which is now BC3. That's over here, just on the right hand side in the middle, but they've also got a major site there, but also there's plans for a relief road there. So there are some concerns over that area as well about the sustainability. And then you've got the east of Solihull site, Lugtrout Lane, and then Catherine de Barnes, a small site, and then 2 over in Hampton and Arden. I've not included all the Knoll ones, but I thought it's important just to mention the impact on the green belt. So this is the map that we saw before, and I've overlaid, and there's going to be an animation when I click now. If you watch the green belt assessment actually slowly fading in over it. So you can see here down in Shirley, and this was what Jean was mentioning, that highest value green belt site that's included in the plan, which is marked at 8, actually covers what was site 26 and site 4, now BL3 and BL1. But I did a bit of analysis because it's very difficult. You're probably zooming in or squinting at the screen at the moment. I'll put this into a table and actually analysed the impact on the combined areas. So in terms of the impact on the green belt, the Blythe sites average a score of 7.23 across the 3 sites. And the average green belt impact in Knoll is 6. That 4.72 line is the average impact of all the sites included. So North Solihull, because it's not using any green belt, obviously has a score of 0. The East Solihull one, because some of the other Solihull sites are in brownfields areas, don't have a huge impact. Overall, Meriden, again, lower, Hampton and Arden, lower, again, partly because of the size of the pockets as well, and using some brownfield sites over there. So if we look at the actual sites, ranked in order, the worst impacted is BL3, the second worst impacted is BL1. If you're wondering why it's 7.7, we're having to look at 2 different green belt areas. Part of it has a score of 8, part of it has a score of 7. So it aggregates out at sort of 7.7. And then, the 5th worst is also the BL2 site, which is between Stratford Road and Cheswick Green. So there were some alternatives that were proposed throughout the years. The first one that we sort of talked about, now this is Greenbelt site, but it's where the UK Central HS2 interchange site is going. And we were saying that actually, because this is going to be built up, you've got really good transport infrastructure links from the airport, from the NEC, from Birmingham Business Park, and you're going to have HS2 coming in there, which will also have its own transport infrastructure. This is quite a sustainable location for living, and it also reduces some of that pressure that's put on other areas and other infrastructure for people who want to take benefit of HS2. So you could have quite high density housing here because of the existing infrastructure around there. Within the plan period, those 15 years that we're talking about, there's only 500 homes going on here. They do talk about 2,700. That's actually 2,200 going on an NEC site. Only 500 will go in this site in that time. The other one is Solihull Town Centre. So there's a bit of a problem around this. The town centre master plan, we currently have as the supporting evidence the 2016-17 plan. A new one was published about a week after the consultation went live on this. And there's a big problem. Obviously, it's not going to be knocking down all the sites within this area, but Mel Square, Poplar Way, the old Beatties, House of Fraser site is going to be redeveloped, and there's some parcels of land around by the job centre and some potential office repurposing that can be done. One of the problems with the existing master plan is it's looking to increase office space, and I think we all recognise that actually what's probably more important for the local economy is producing high quality homes where people can work from home, as homes have become more of an office, which is probably one of the changes that's going to be here to stay since the pandemic came around. The final one was looking at the regeneration of Chelmsley Wood Town Centre. So we've currently got vacant and dormant office space around there, which would give an opportunity not only for providing additional housing, but offering a regeneration project to a part of the borough which is in the lower deciles of the indexes of multiple deprivation. I'm just going to quickly run through the infrastructure impact, and Steve will be getting ready a presentation that was given by Tom O'Sullivan to the full council meeting earlier this year. So when we think about infrastructure, I mean, there's lots of things we can consider, but the main ones really are, roads or transport, doctors and schools. And when I say roads, is one of the worst things we can do is build the green belt out, because you make people more car dependent. If you can build up in areas where you have good transport infrastructure, you can improve the transport infrastructure there. So the doctors is really relevant for Shirley, and schools also. Just to sort of set the scene for this, all these red dots are where there are either new or in development extra care or retirement facilities in Shirley. Number 1 is the power gen. Number 2 is the Morrison site, which is being redeveloped. 3 was the old Woolman site. 4, the old police station. 5, office supplies. 6, the dementia home at Sanssouci. 7 is the McCarthy and Stone next to Porcelanosa. And 8 is the Shirley Aquatic site. So there's been a real concentration of extra care and retirement facilities. It's not to say that they're not needed, but they should be distributed across the borough. Creating this nexus in Shirley is creating real problems for doctors' infrastructure, which should hopefully lead in very well to the video that I hope Steve is able to share. So I'll hand over to Steve to click play on that video.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors and council members. For the purpose of this statement, I am speaking from a professional perspective. And by way of context, I just wanted to highlight that the local development plan contains the word health 135 times, but healthcare only 7 times. And in fact, for phrases general practice, dentist and hospital don't feature at all. And while the plan does recognise the impact of the built environment on health and well-being, I feel that the impact of the new developments on healthcare services is not being given sufficient consideration. There are 3 brief points I would like to make regarding the plan, considering the impact of developments on local health services, the impact of policy changes, and finally the lack of infrastructure investment into local health services. So with regard to the impact of developments on local health services are already failing to keep pace with current demand. Healthcare services tend to be accessed at the most by the very young and the very old. And the demographic challenge of an ageing population is often described in forums such as this. But what this specifically means for GPS healthcare is that our older population is 30% higher than the national average. We've seen a rapid increase in development of residential care homes in Solihull, and it follows that these homes have a disproportionate impact on GP services. Furthermore, many residential developments are focused on either retirement homes or young family starter homes, and this exaggerates the impact on existing services and should be acknowledged and mitigated by this plan. Turning to policy changes, over the last 5 years, Solihull Hospital has been downgraded 3 times, from an A&E department to a minor injuries department to a primary care walk-in service. Currently, there's no provision of acute services in the hospital, with the primary care service having been relocated temporarily to the north of the borough, and this has increased the burden of care managed by general practice in the borough, with most practices already at capacity, and consequently access has become a pressing concern for citizens in multiple practices across the borough. The local plan was written prior to any of the current NHS national policies having been developed, and this is reflected in the partnership section of the plan, failing to include clinical commissioning groups, or indeed the Birmingham and Solihull Sustainability and Transformation Group, of which Solihull MBC is a founding member. It is likely that health policy will continue to out-accelerate planning policy. However, much could be done to future-proof planning policy by considering the drive towards decentralised care out of hospitals and in the community. Provision for this should feature in this plan. Finally, infrastructure investment. The mechanisms designed to ensure developers pay a fair cost towards developing infrastructure are not effective in ensuring developers pay their fair share towards healthcare infrastructure. The consequence of this is that existing services already stretched risk being put under further pressure as new developments are built out and sold through. Health and well-being is not a theme addressed within the economic challenge set out in the plan. It should be. Over the last 10 years, healthcare productivity has grown at a rate 3 times greater than the broader economy. Put simply, we are already doing more for less. The value of high-quality health and social care does not appear to be recognised as having economic value. I would urge that this be reconsidered and that developers be held to a higher level of scrutiny regarding the protection and enhancement of high-quality health and social care services being mandatory as a condition of planning. And finally, I'm grateful for the opportunity to put these points forward for consideration, and I hope to continue to contribute with colleagues from across health and social care going forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just waiting to get screen sharing back, and then I'm just going to get back to where I was on the presentation. So in terms of other infrastructure, I think obviously Tom O'Sullivan was making a very good point in that, you know, this is already having a bit of an impact on the provision of primary healthcare, which is obviously doctors and hospitals. In terms of schools, there is a new school site proposed there, and obviously in relation to roads, building out onto the green belt is probably the worst for transport thing that you can do, because the further you get out, the more car dependent you are. You know, Dickens Heath was an experiment in reducing car dependency. What they did is they created roads where it wasn't as easy to sort of drive around and drive through, but also it wasn't as easy to get buses into. And the hope was that, you know, Whitlock's End Station would occupy it, but it's not safe and convenient to get along Tithe Barn Lane. It's very dangerous late at night if you were to be cycling there. And most parents there will tell you that they are, you know, the taxi of mum and dad to get their kids around to places. So it's becomes more and more likely that that's the case the further you extend out into the green belt. And there's a couple of points that I want to touch on as well. There's an elephant in the room around affordability on here. I won't try and trudge too much into this, but this is actually one of the documents in the supporting evidence, which I'm just focusing here on site 11, because this is probably the best indication for the Shirley and Blythe sites. The red at the bottom, that's actually the kind of the net amount that the developer would make per developable acre. And actually that is in red because it's not classed as viable. The big impact of this is the highlighted paragraph here when they start talking about site 11. It may have the effect of reducing the affordable housing or CIL, which is community infrastructure levy requirement, and thus increasing the residual land value for previously developed land sites. So they're talking about basically less affordable housing coming through on there. And one of the other pages of here actually talks, you can see there, that figure, average net sales value for the market housing, 340,578. So it's above the median 277,000. And that's partly why developers are so keen to build on the green belt, because you do get very good property values out of it. And you have to consider that the other sites in Shirley and Blythe are further into the green belt. So we're probably going to see that effect increased even higher. The rural site there, site 2, you notice the actual average net sales value, 373. North Solihull, which is urban, 202,000. So it's one of the reasons why we get pushed into giving up the green belt. It's because, it works very well for developers in terms of their profit margins. I'll share these details in the chat afterwards, and what I'll do whilst we're doing Q&As, I think we may have to abandon the polling, but I want to open it up for all of you to ask some questions. And also I'll give an opportunity for Stuart Woodhall, if he wants to come in and make any comments, he can do. So if you want to put your questions in the chat box, by all means put them in there. And yeah, Stuart, if you did want to share a few words, the floor is yours.
Hi, Max. You hear me okay? Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly well.
Really interesting presentation. Obviously, as the SSCG group, obviously we've been fairly vocal over the last few years, and obviously a big success with we're getting allocation 13 removed. But there obviously is still quite a lot to look at and quite a lot going on. I guess the thing we can do as a community is make sure that we respond to this. But as you say, time is short. So 14th of December, I think the feedback window closes. So I think we can try and put something together, certainly as a group, to sort of maybe help people and guide people how to respond, and what's the best way to respond. So I think that's something we can take away from this. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Stuart. And I think another point as well, one of the things that the SSCG are possibly able to help with as well, there are some notice boards around Shirley South, one on Neville Road next to what's technically a village green. It's a parcel of land just as you come in from the second exit from Bill's Lane, if you were coming from the Stratford Road side. There's also one between Woodlows and Baxter's Green, and a third one on Baxter's Green. So we can possibly put some of the information into those notice boards as well, because I'm really conscious that it's great that we're able to convene on Zoom and have these sort of discussions here, and you can put your questions across. But there are a lot of people who this will be impacting, who probably don't have any idea, firstly, that this meeting's going on, or how to join it. And some still probably won't be fully versed in what's going on with this plan. It has kind of been launched in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm going to kind of open it up. If you're not comfortable with typing questions in the question box, if anybody does want to just put their camera on and wave, I can see one hand up. So I'm going to open that question to it says Gemma Taft, but I think that's Mark Taft.
Hi everybody. Just one of the questions I wanted to raise really after today's meeting. We've been busy looking at putting some proposals to the council because we've been following some of the council meetings. But I just wondered, having seen the poor response we've got today, I mean 18 people is appalling really. I mean we put stuff on the next door site and the allocation 13 site. I know it's had some things on. And I just wonder, and I've also spoken to various people and some neighbours and things, it's obvious they just haven't got the message. And I just wondered how we can, between us actually manage to bring this forward, else to be honest, I think we're wasting our time.
So on that front, what I was quickly trying to do, as you were saying that, was find on Solihull Council one of the previous bits of evidence that we had was the supplementary update consultation responses. Within that, one of the things that we asked for was a heat map, just to show where the responses came from. Now, on that consultation, there was obviously a lot more work. Some of the fantastic volunteers from SSCG were going around with petitions as well. So there were, we're talking over I think there was 3,000 petition signatures on that, and close to 2,000 full consultation responses on the previous consultations to this. The big fear that we have is, firstly, everything kind of went quiet, and this is why I'm really unhappy about the consultation process for this. It feels like lots of stuff has been dumped in the middle of this pandemic with very little notice. It went to the cabinet at Solihull Council and then to full council. We didn't see this finished document going through a scrutiny board or going through a cabinet portfolio holder decision session. And one of the reasons why I feel it was incredibly rushed, normally you have the council papers produced a week before the meeting. The cabinet meeting was less than a week before the council meeting, so the actual decision wasn't even in there. There was the decision at the full council to approve this, even though it hadn't actually been approved by cabinet. So it makes me feel like this has been forced through and pushed through very quickly, and it is going to be hard to get through to people in this time. If you turn the TV on today, the main thing you're going to be hearing about is probably vaccines and the Grand Prix and something else. So, and people are really quite fatigued by news at this stage, especially if it is less optimistic. And I want to just kind of jump in here and say, I'm not pessimistic about this stage. We have had successes and victories here before. And I think if there is a deliberate attempt to sort of push this through very quickly, it's because there is a fear that there will be a public opinion which would push them to change their decisions, which is what happened last time. So I don't think we should be too pessimistic. We only agreed to holding this meeting a week ago, and it is sort of very last minute. We've done our best. I've worked tirelessly to try and put slides together, and had a bit of a failure with the polls on there. But it's difficult to get the message out when we can't do the usual thing of knocking on people's doors and having conversations with them at the street and in the shops. But I'll open that up to the other people who were speaking if they want to come in and add anything. I don't know if Jean, if you wanted to say anything on that.
Yes, I entirely agree. It is so difficult to get the message over. I've been trying to use social media as much as we can, but it is difficult. What else we can do, I don't know. But there should have been an extension of time, at least to Christmas, because the officers aren't going to be working on it after the 14th anyway for 2-3 weeks. And it wouldn't have hurt even another 2 weeks, would it? But I don't think they wanted all this information scrutinised too much. It doesn't stack up. It really doesn't. There's some big flaws in a lot of the information. Okay.
Yeah, there's a pertinent thing here, and again, I'm gonna phrase this quite carefully because I don't want to generalize in any way. I'm just going to share one of the slides that was in that presentation. In the bottom left of this infographic, you can see the population of Solihull is 214,910, and over 65s make up 21% of the population. England, it's 18%. So we have got an older population in Solihull, and obviously those retirement homes have pushed up the average age as well in Shirley. And I know that we have some older people who are very technologically savvy, but we know as well in terms of digital isolation and digital exclusion that is the demographic which are most susceptible to digital exclusion. So as great as it is to have something like this on a forum like Zoom, there'll be lots of people who've never used Zoom before who would be interested in what we're saying. So that's part of the reason why we're recording it and putting it onto YouTube. And I know that there has been some work going on Facebook sharing, sharing information as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in and either ask another question, so you can either wave or type within the chat box. I can see Chris making some sort of signals there to speak.
Well, I just want to answer on this question really, and I'll answer it in two ways. One way is somebody rings me up from Lincolnshire and they say, what are you going to do about the bulldozers at the bottom of my back garden? And I'll say to them, what did you do about the consultation about the plan for your local area, through which appeared through as a leaflet drop through your letterbox 20 years ago? Oh, I don't bother with that sort of thing. That's why the bulldozers at the bottom of that garden today. So to a certain extent, what is happening here is Solihull Council don't want people to engage with this process, and they want to make this process as complicated and as opaque as possible. Now, there's two arguments to that. One is, at this moment in time, it's not necessarily about the volume of objection. It is actually about the legality and the nitty-gritty of questioning whether this plan is sound or legal. So to a certain extent, if there are elements where it is not sound, it's not legal, then those will be elements that the inspector at the public examination will want to hear and will enable people who currently don't think they're having a voice, they will have their voice in front of an inspector rather than in front of council officers who don't want to have the discussion. The other thing is, carry on irrespective of the timetable. Carry on making sure that people are aware that this is going to come. And the more that people are aware that it's going to come, the more noise there will be through the local press, through people talking to each other, and you then start to get round the process. So there's two tactics, I would say, from the point that Mark Taft was making.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I was mentioning about the judicial review. It's a bit of a blunderbuss approach. I think what the council has asked for is for community groups to compile what everybody would want them to say and submit that as a kind of a summary of what the objections or points are. The problem is that if you fail to make something which is pertinent to the judicial review, if you fail to say that at a relevant decision-making stage, you have no opportunity to take that point to judicial review. Similarly, if you want to speak to the inspector, you will have to speak on subjects that are part of your submission. And I think, if you look at the consultation process, the previous ones were very long. I think some of them like 42 questions, and you were expected to know all the relevant parts of the plan. This one, if you go onto the council's portal, you have to basically wade through the 350 pages of the plan and highlight the bit that you want to make reference to. I think that it's important that people understand that's not the only way that you respond to this consultation. You can email PSP, and I'll put this in the chat box for anyone, psp@solihull.gov.uk, or you can also write to the council, making it for the attention of spatial planning. And it's important to make sure that you put on their local plan review consultation response. So there are other ways, those are some of the ways in which you can respond to the plan, because you're right that this is probably more difficult and more obtuse than it needs to be. When I was looking through which of the local authorities have extended, one of the local authorities that I came across has published all the evidence and published all the information. They're at a similar stage, and they've announced now that the consultation will be starting at the end of January, so 21st of January. I think that shows a big, difference between how Solihull is doing this, which is all the information lands, the consultation started. So the first day it lands is the first day of the consultation. It's pointless. Nobody can actually qualify an answer to that consultation on day one. It's for me, who's the most familiar with it out of anybody in the green group on Solihull Council, I'm still not fully got to grips with it. And that's because I am trying to read in great detail all of the relevant and pertinent information. So as much as it is hard to put a submission in, I think from what you understand of this, whatever little you understand, if it's completely different to what I, Jean, Chris, or anybody else says, it may be relevant and pertinent to the inspector. It may be relevant and pertinent at a judicial review. So I don't think anyone should be dissuaded from actually responding to this. And, you know, any ideas of how we can better communicate this, I'm willing to, not only willing to hear, I want to hear from all of you. Jean, you can see you've got your hand up.
If I can just add to that, I did send a note out to as many people as I can, but as long as, you're quite right, as long as you can just send even a short note on what is right for you, what you're concerned about, to psb@solihull.gov. But you must put your name and address on it. That's, otherwise it's not counted. So for anybody else that's watching this, a letter with your name and address, either post it or email it to Solihull Council. You don't have to go through all these rigmarole of all these forms and site numbers. Just say specifically what you're concerned about. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, just on that point, when we upload this to YouTube on Solihull Green's YouTube page, we will put those links in the description underneath. I believe Colin Rock had his hand up as well, and then we have, after Colin Rock's given his question, we have got a question in the chat box as well. So Colin, over to you.
Not so much of a question really, as just agreement with some of the points that Jean and Chris have brought up about the actual design being maybe already out of date. It's not very imaginative. I certainly wouldn't give any awards for Dickens Heath and the access around that, because that road is terrible, blocked every day, piled up, and trying to get a bus round the parked cars. Everybody needs 2 cars these days, unless they've got easy access. But just coming onto the footpaths, I'm quite interested in that footpaths could be created, and they may as well be cycleways while they're at it. But they should be maintained and lit, and that's another cost. And along the Blythe, I think that would be a good idea, Jean. I don't know why they haven't built in some better provision for access, actually, access roads to where people will want to go. I mean, it'd be nice to cycle to Solihull, but people will still want to get to the motorway junctions one way or another. And it's still a bit of a tortuous route for them to get to the motorways. I mentioned the parking in Dickens Heath. Everyone needs 2 cars, and if they're not going to get allocated blocks or parking on the driveways, they're just going to be in the road. Flooding, I would have thought, is an issue, because I walked around the Blythe Valley footpath the other day, and it's extremely wet, and all those new buildings that go up there, it's very muddy. It holds the water. I think they put extra drainage in there, but it just looks a bit of a mess to me. Infrastructure, yes, water supplies, drainage, that's a problem. Obviously, I presume they've allowed for all that. Social infrastructure, GPs definitely, but secondary health, I mean, it's a long way to East Birmingham Hospital and Solihull Hospital if that's going to carry on as it is. But not just the GPs, there's mental health care as well. I'm just getting an idea that mental health might be a bit stretched already, and the outlook isn't good for mental health. And I think they're going to need a lot more support. So are there more beds? Are there more staff? More resources on that? Green belt. I'd like to be able to see green belt really connecting or separating these places, and just giving kids a bit of space, not far from the houses, to go and kick a ball or, you know, ride the first bike. It's all very concentrated. I think it needs to be more imaginative. That's what I said in the first place. Better access roads. Don't drive us all round. Don't let people pile up trying to get out from their own home. And better access to where they actually want to go, and that will be motorway Birmingham or Solihull if there's any jobs there. And better infrastructure around. just more imaginative. I agree with Chris. I think it's probably already out of date, some of the ways.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Colin. What I wanted to do is I will hand over to Jean, and offer, if Chris wants to take an opportunity to speak on that as well, I will come to them again. I just wanted to share one of the slides which probably puts this into context as well, because one of the things that was mentioned was the gaps between different settlements. You can't see very clearly, but that's the edge of Chiswick Green. Site 12 is leaving a tiny gap there. And then actually that red and that will be the gap between Shirley and Dickens Heath then, which is again a tiny gap. Now, we got called NIMBYs because we were arguing on behalf of Shirley at one of the council meetings. And I've just recently seen one of the Dorridge, actually, no, sorry, not the Knoll or Dorridge councillors complaining about there were 12 houses proposed within this gap and saying that would be merging Solihull and Knoll. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, where these houses go elsewhere on the green belt, because part of what we advocated was UK Central, Solihull Town Centre master plan, and it's marked there. You can't really actually see it. The orange square is Chelmsley Wood Town Centre, doing more of that and actually building up rather than out. I'm yet to encounter someone who doesn't agree with the principle that they would rather see houses 2 stories higher in town centres than building 2-storey houses further out across the green belt. And one of the reasons why that's really important is in terms of the transport infrastructure as well. If it's people of my age, they're less bothered about living on a higher story of a building. If they're next to places where they can, you know, go out to eat and drink, you keep town centres viable for other people in the future, because how do you keep people of my generation and younger shopping? Well, if they're walking past the shops to get into their house, then it's much easier. If it's quicker and easier for me to walk down to the bus stop or to the train station than try and fight my way through traffic, I'll be using a train and a bus instead. So we have to think about actually how do we build places that are fit for the future, you know, apartments which can work as offices as well. So I think there's a number of concerns and considerations there, and I know Jean wanted to answer, and then after that I'll go to the question in the chat box.
Yes, thank you, Max. First of all, I entirely agree with what you've said there. But I just wanted to add something that Colin brought up. I really feel that Solihull have missed a trick here. If we are going to have all these houses in the Blythe area particularly, I have a vision, and I hope you'd agree with this. Where we've started off with site 13 being a country park now, if site BL3 goes ahead, we'd really want a linked country walk cycle route, linking the green spaces with the former site, or site 13. If we can link that then down to the station, we can't do a lot there, but then if Tidbury Green Golf Course came along, you could then have a country park link along the River Cole, which is towards in between the boundaries between Bromsgrove and Solihull. So you're then creating a green wedge, and that can then carry on through to the Miller's site, so that you have got for all time a separation between Bromsgrove and Solihull, which I'm very concerned about the overall merging in the future. And that is something that will benefit all the residents in the area, of having a safe walkway, cycleway, access to open space that's so important through this COVID crisis, and this will be in the future. And I really feel that if Solihull would be open to a suggestion like that, at least we'd be getting something back that'd be really positive. That there's grants to do this, that there's landowners willing to do this. And I think if we all join together and talk about this, it's something that could be created.
I think one of the other points, just quickly, that you had mentioned, I know that we have got some of the Shirley West councillors, the impact of flooding isn't just as well in terms of the the area that the housing is built on. Where we have probably the worst impact in flooding, I should probably share the screen again, isn't actually necessarily on these sites. It's further down here in Shirley West. I'm trying to pull out Nethercote Gardens on the map, but the problem that you have is if you build over these areas where some of the water gets absorbed into the ground, and we have to remember that it's quite clay, the soil around here, so it doesn't absorb as well as silty soil would. But if you have more concrete, more tarmac put around there, more of the surface water moves away more quickly. Now, a developer's way of dealing with this is what's called SUD, sustainable drainage systems, where you build little ponds where they can capture the water. But again, one of the reasons why I didn't try and present as much of the flooding data is massively out of date. You know, the things which are like 1 in 100-year flooding instances, I can pull some which have had 5 in 20 years. You know, so it's that ridiculously out of date because the climate has changed, and it depends on whether you look at the change in the climate recently as an anomaly or a trend which indicates future change, and that's one of the big problems and one of the big fights. But if the Environment Agency doesn't acknowledge it within their data, we won't have as much of an argument to push developers to address that. And generally, they don't say, oh, we won't build there. We'll just put some more drainage work in there. I'll just run to the question over in the chat. I won't disclose the name because it's not a full name in there. If you do want that disclosed, you can add it to the chat. But it says, I live in Neville Road, and whilst fighting against building on allocation 13 was deemed a success, it resulted in allocation 26 taking its place, which in effect will have a greater impact on traffic around Bills Lane and Haslicks Green Road. Also, is allocation 26 privately owned land? And does this make it different to the other allocations? Now, I can answer some of that. So firstly, yes, you're right. And I know that what can often feel like happening with, if you're fighting specific developments, it's a bit like with wallpaper. If you've got a bubble underneath it, it feels like if you press down on the bubble, it appears, bubbles up somewhere else next to it. And I think that's how some people felt about allocation 13. I think it also becomes a bit more of a challenge because some people feel that there's been a victory, and so they sort of, you know, down tools and head home in relation to a campaign. But I think that there's a legitimate argument against Site 26, which is now BL3. As well, and it isn't just in terms of the impact on Bills Lane and Haslicks Green Road. One of the pages that I could have put up for this, and I recommend that if you do look at the documents, look at the site master plans document, because there's a page which talks about sites BL1, 2 and 3. Again, I'll post that link underneath the video on YouTube, but that actually shows that they are primarily trying to drive more traffic down Haslicks Green Road and Bills Lane to protect Dog Kennel Lane, Blackford Road and Tamworth Lane. So it is going to have a disproportionate impact on those areas anyway. In relation to the ownership, a lot of Site 13 was owned by the council, and so there were sort of threats that if we wanted affordable or social housing, it had to go on council land, and so we would have to accept Site 13. Now, my argument was, as much as I want to see social and affordable housing, I don't think that you can be held ransom by saying, well, this is the only place it will go. I had said to the council that they should be buying sites prior to this process if they were interested in doing that. Instead, there were just some sites for commercial development for the benefit of developers in urban areas. So that's another kind of element to it. It is privately owned, Site 26. If you want to find out who owns land, you can go to a map search on the Land Registry website. It costs £3 to pull up the title and the deeds, and it can sometimes be a little bit unclear. But yes, I think many people in the area probably have a decent idea of the ownership of that land, so I won't get into and yes, Paul Gugiari, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who posed that question. So does it make it different to the other allocations? In terms of the local plan, technically not. In terms of what goes on there, yes, it does. If it's land that's owned by the council would have more of a say in terms of what's built on there. If it's owned privately, they would have less say of what's built on there. But the developer, again, the arrangements on this are always quite obtuse and difficult to get a grasp on. People think the developers are the builder. The developer is the person who's kind of making the profit, but you'll have builders separately, you'll have landowners, you'll have people who are involved in the legal process, you'll have financiers as well. On the page I showed you about the viability, there's £7.1 million in just finance costs for Site 11. So if that's a finance, an umbrella company that owns your development company, who's lending you the money as an internal transfer, you can find ways to ensure that the 20% profit margin that developers are guaranteed before any affordable housing is built is rarely met. So it is very confusing and a little bit problematic. So I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on that. I know Chris has mentioned something in the chat box there. And I don't know if that's something he wanted me to read out, but I don't know if anybody else had questions either around affordability, just while I read what Chris has written in the chat. So yeah, I mean, Chris has made some comments in the chat, and if he does want to, read those out publicly, he's more than welcome to. Any comments or questions that anybody else has? I'm welcome for anybody to wave their hands, because I don't see any there. So if Chris is all right for me to read out his comments in the chat box, I'm quite happy to.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to say something. I'm just conscious of the fact that this is the meeting for people who really want to get to grips with the local issues. But I think Jean touches on a really important point. And when you're looking at local plans, you can't just look at them in isolation. They will try at the inquiry, and they will only let you focus on what is in play at the moment. And that is a massive disservice to local knowledge, because what you won't be able to do is look backwards, but also to speculate as to what will come next. And that is to your detriment, because it does not enable you to start to focus on where Solihull is going to go next. And if any of us have been in this process for a number of years, we will know that they have always got the next iteration of the plan in their heads as they are discussing the one that is in front of the inspector at the moment. And you can see that writ large in the development that's taken place in Solihull over the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, one of the points that you raised, which was really useful, was the old Shirley relief road. So I'm just trying to so for people's benefit, I'm just going to try and share that on the screen. So the old Shirley relief road was originally kind of going to be Dog Kennel Lane continuing along the back along here. Now, one of the concerns that we have, and we've been offered a little bit of explanation on this, one of the problems with site BL2 and BL3 is they don't have what's called defensible boundaries. Now, defensible boundaries are sometimes hedgerows, they're canals, they're railway lines, or roads. And if you notice there, BL1, the defensible boundary that's being used to the north of BL1 on this parcel is the canal. And on BL3 being used to the west is the railway line embankment, because obviously you can't kind of build up there. So that's why there's a bit of a sloping down. So what they've mentioned in there is roads may be needed to form the defensible boundary. So the fear is obviously you can parcel in the houses here and kind of rope them in. The other fear is whether or not you end up with a road kind of from Crenald's Lane running along the site of BL2, joining up with Tamworth Lane, and then eventually curling round and joining into Bill's Lane at the end of site BL3. Now, we don't necessarily know that is going to happen, but again, that's the kind of fear that we have when you look at that new sort of line of development which is being built, and the long-term preservation of the land around site 13. So I don't know if anybody else wanted to come in on that as well. No, I mean we've got 5 more minutes, so if anybody has comments that they wanted to make or anything else, and Chris, you know what Chris has mentioned there, I think it's probably best that you say that, Chris, because you'll say it more persuasively than I will.
I mean, I think, you know, Max makes a really good point about defensible boundaries, and like he's mentioned some of the ones in connection with the Shirley Relief Road, and that was actually a plan that was coming forward as a result of the M40 coming up from the south and the east, and that also factored into quite a large part of South Birmingham, King's Heath, Moseley, Sparkhill, Stratford Road, which were thankfully all defeated. And if they hadn't have been defeated, we would have probably seen something like the Walsall Road, if you know the Walsall Road, 3 lanes, more or less, dual carriageway going through the north of Birmingham. We'd have probably seen something like that going through Shirley and South Birmingham up to the Middle Ring Road. And in terms of defensible barriers within Solihull, the 2 really important ones up till now have been the M42 and the Meriden Gap. And I would say that this plan is really driving a horse and carts through that. And that's why I think people have got to focus on this plan in the short term, but also really start to think about how Solihull can change its future desires for development. And if it doesn't do so, then in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, you'll be looking at the land at the moment that you're thinking you're protecting as being under threat. And I think that's the clarion call that Jean is making.
Jean, did you want to come in at all on those points, because we will be wrapping up shortly, so I don't know if you have any more final comments.
No, I'm entirely agreeing with what's being said here. So I haven't got any more comments. I think they've been very valid comments everybody's made. I think it's been a worthwhile meeting, and perhaps we should do it again soon.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's definitely an argument for that, and I confess, and I said this openly before, it's such a mammoth thing to get to grips with. It's not just 10,500 pages and £4 billion worth of housing that's appearing, which you can feel very small and insignificant in light of that. But actually, in relation to SSCG, and I have to give a huge amount of thanks to the people from South Solihull Community Group who are involved with this, because it's in relative terms a small number of people who were very committed, and it was about thinking about the well-being of other people and other people within the area, and also habitats and biodiversity. That their efforts have made the single largest change to the plan in its course of evolution. And I've been contacted by lots of other people elsewhere in the borough and other people elsewhere in the country about how did you do that? So don't ever underestimate your influence on this, because the biggest limit to your influence is the belief that you can have no influence and you do nothing. I think Chris mentioned this before. You have to submit something. Ideally, it will be a challenge on the legality and the soundness. If you're worried about whether or not it's what you're arguing against is the legality and soundness of the plan, 2 things you can do. I can post my phone number in the chat box as well. So if you're wanting to have a conversation with me, you can speak to me. I see Chris Crean's also shared his contact details there. I've shared the email address for how you can email your response into Solihull Council, and let me know what your thoughts are. But if you're unsure, it's better to send in a response than to not send in a response, because you can guarantee an unsent response won't be heard or read. So that's the most important and pertinent thing. I'm going to offer one final opportunity for anybody else to come in. So I'll look out for either comments in the chat box or hands up. In that case, I'm going to say thank you very much to all of you. And if you've watched it on YouTube, yeah, so Chris has made a really valid point as well. You can always withdraw your submission before the inquiry opens if you so choose. So yeah, it's a really valid point about making those submissions to this. So I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined, and if you are watching this on YouTube after the event, if we are going to organise other ones, we'll probably put that in the comments underneath that video as well, so it's relevant to anybody who is looking in. But thank you all for your contributions, your commitment, and yeah, get in touch with me if you've got questions about how we can put in meaningful contributions to the local plan. All right, thank you.
Max, will you send the link to the YouTube video so we can post it out on our group, please?
Absolutely, will do, and I'll stick it on other social media as well. All right,
thank you.
Very good points, Stu. Yeah, so it'll be shared on Facebook. Wherever you found out about this, it's probably going to be there, and some other places as well. So thank you all very much, and I'll close the meeting now. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Max.
Cheers, folks. Thanks a lot. Good luck.